Okay, thanks everybody for coming. This is our third webinar in 2021, and it's a continuation of our series of webinars we started back in March of 2020, and I think this is like number 75 or something of the webinars that we've been doing, and we're going to continue to do. We've had some great guests. Got another great one today. We're going to chat about all different stuff, even going forward that we have been. But today we're going to talk about virtual coaching. And all of us are here. We're learning about data and how to understand it better. And of course, the end product of that is the end result being try to get faster on the track. And so while we may not talk a ton about the squiggly lines and what exactly everything means, we will do some of that today with Dion. But we're going to look at the end result and what does data really help us do? What data and video, and how does that get us to the end result of getting faster and getting better. I do see that we've got a slight echo, so I don't know how to fix that right now. I'm not hearing it on my end, but we'll see if it cleans itself up. Sometimes Zoom does that. So let's go ahead and do a quick introduction of our guest. Let me see if I can get that to actually work. There we go. Our host today is Dion von Moltke. Dion runs an operation called Racers 360, and I've been around Dion. We've got tons of mutual friends and acquaintances, and but I don't think we ever met. I think I was in some groups where we were chatting back in 2007 and 8 when we were kind of at the same tracks a lot.
Amazing how time flies.
Isn't it though? And so Dion has been moving on with his career, doing all sorts of things. As the screen shows there, winner of the Rolex at 24 and two-time Sebring 12-hour winner. So very, very accomplished as a driver, and many drivers, and Dion being at the top of this list. And then he kind of turns that into helping other people, and becoming an active coach in some of the stuff that he's doing. And he's come up with a system here that is pretty interesting and pretty neat the way that it works. So I think about if Dion was if I recall what he was telling me, about 80% of his customers come to him with AIM data. And because of that, this is just a great tie to talk about what a lot of our users are doing as being his customers, and chat about what it is, how it works. We'll kind of couch it around, though, what is remote, virtual coaching, right? So we're going to kind of start there, and then go into some of what he does, and we're even going to have an example of one of our AIM fellas here, that one of our AIM techs with Brick. He has some data that we've looked at before in our webinars with some VIR data from his streetcar. So we're going to use that as the data and video, and we'll actually go through a little bit of his process of coaching. So thanks for coming, Dion. I appreciate it. We've been chatting about it for a month or two, and everybody's busy. And of course, with the pandemic and all that, it makes things to schedule sometimes a little bit hard. But I appreciate you coming. Thank you for coming here today.
No, thanks for having me on. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us as well. Really excited to have a fun time, talk some data, talk some video, talk some racing, which we always are obviously passionate about. And anytime we can go talk about that, it's a good time for me.
Exactly. It will be fun. We chatted about a little bit about your racing background. Give us a little bit more about Dion. What what got you where you're at today and what you're doing in the world of motorsports?
Yeah. So I've been racing since I was about 14 years old, and was fortunate to do pretty well in it, and go from karting to sports cars and get to drive for some of the top teams in motorsports, from Alex Job Racing to Flying Lizard Motorsports to Audi themselves, and get invited to go out and do some DTM testing as well. So I've been very fortunate in my career, and when I look back, I know a lot of what I was able to achieve was because I had access to world-class coaches from an early standpoint in an early part of my career. And that sort of got me passionate behind, well, I know it's not the access and affordability behind that wasn't available to everyone. So as my career started to wind down, I said, what can we do to fix that? And how do we make this more accessible, and help scale those coaches as well? So we've been very fortunate with being able to launch Racers 360, and the reception we've had behind that's been tremendous, working with over 500 race car drivers to date, doing a little over 1,000 race car coaching sessions over the last year and a half. So been just having a ton of fun with that, seeing the reception, and now scaling that model beyond motorsports, even into more traditional sports like soccer and surfing and basketball coming up soon as well. So it's been a lot of fun.
And technology has allowed you to do that, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
if we'd have tried to do this when I first met you in 2007, let's say, this would have been a very difficult process. But
Absolutely.
but as technology has continued to roll forward, our technology, certainly as a data acquisition company, is getting better and better all the time. And of course, computers, and you can do this stuff at the track now, and very remotely with cellular and some other things. So
Yeah,
technology has
exactly.
helped you do this as well. And do you see that continuing to grow?
Totally.
Are you seeing that there's things that are helping you do what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like if you think about one of the harder aspects from a company perspective, we do same day turnaround coaching sessions. So let's say you're in weekend, you have a session Friday, you want to get that coach session Friday night. We all know that Wi-Fi from the racetracks can be a problem. So like one of our hurdles from a technical perspective is teach people how do you trim video so it's not uploading a 2 GB file, it's uploading a 50 MB file, which makes upload a lot easier. But with the introduction of things like Starlink, satellite, Wi-Fi, satellites coming out so that Wi-Fi becomes better and 5G networks come better, it's going to make it easier for everyone to upload files from racetrack. That's going to make our job easier. So I think this is we're at the very start of a brand new model of making this format of online coaching or online learning what it should be. I think the experience of online learning is not the best, and it's been done wrong so many times before. Online learning is not your generic YouTube videos. Coaching is a personalized thing. It has to be personalized to the learners. We're going to go through today. There's so many different ways that people learn that you could be doing things wrong. There's not a, hey, here's the quick tip and this is what's going to work. Sure, we can learn from those and we can develop our skills a little bit. But if you really want to start to progress as a learner in anything we do, it's going to have to be personalized. So I think we're just at the start of the kind of brand new model of how to do online learning right and how to do it personalized.
We here have spent a little bit of time on learning styles, just as part of what we do with James Colburn
Yep.
has been kind of helping us walk down that path. And we just in the last few days, we now have a date for the next level of learning styles, and what we're going to talk about with James here in probably about 3 or 4 weeks. So I'm sure you run into that as well. You've got a guy that is sitting there and he's looking at, he's giving you some data and some video. Maybe the video is really the tool that works for him. Maybe the video, he doesn't get it as much. He really wants to see the squiggly lines or a combination, right? So you have to also deal with, and you just said this, but you also have to deal with that. You have to feel that person out pretty quickly and understand their learning style, right?
See that all the time. Like from a coaching perspective, for me, for the vast majority of drivers, the video is actually the stronger teaching tool and the stronger teaching environment. But there's a lot of engineers in our sport, right? And engineers learn in a very different way than I learn, right? I am a more visual learner. I am the opposite of an engineer. I could not be an engineer if I tried. My wife, who is an engineer, helped me pass all my math classes in college, right? So, but for them, the data is much more specific and the better tool for them to be able to make the changes in their driving. So you definitely have to tailor and understand, and that's where the personalization comes out.
And what's interesting is, and maybe we will roll over to your screen here in just a moment, but you have built a process where when people send you the video and the data, it's not just a one-time thing. It's not like they just send you some information, you spend that hour with them, and then it falls off the edge of the earth. you're saving it, and you have a history of what you've chatted with this one customer about. You've got video from their video and data, whatever they've sent you listed, and you can go back to it. You can look at real quickly, and your coaches can look at it and say, this is what we talked about. This is what this person needed to work on. And have they improved on that? So
Exactly.
are you ready to take a quick share?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's take a look at what the Racers 360 Studio looks like. I don't know if that's the right term or not, but what the studio looks like, dashboard, and see what it's going to look like if you use this service.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Let me stop that share.
Perfect. So yeah. Hopefully you guys can all see that. So essentially everyone has their own dashboard, right? Again, highly personalized. What we can see here is obviously a motorcycle video. We have motorcycle coaches as well. So essentially everything's asynchronous, which makes it really easy. So that way from the customer aspect, there's no having to schedule or fight around or reschedule. You just upload, you sit back and relax, and you get an email saying, hey, your coaching session's ready. You log in and you have this personalized coaching session. So you can see the coach has their camera up in the top right. The video's paused right now. So they pause it. They use slow motion forward and backwards. If we kind of play it back here, now you can see it. They went forward a little bit, pointing out things. They'll annotate on the video. You can see here, slow motion forwards, slow motion backwards, very, very specific. You can see here, there's a 13-minute long coaching session. So it's bite-sized. It's going to be highly concise focus. You're also going to get notes from your coach. Then you get goals. So the goals are going to say, hey, here are the 4 things I want you to achieve, or the 3 things I want you to achieve. And when you send your next video in, the coach is going to check that off and be like, yep, we did it. Here are the next goals. So they always have you progressing, and it always lives in your dashboard. So if you go all videos, you come here, you can see all of my coaching sessions are here. I can go back and watch them anytime, see if they're in progress. If I have a same-day turnaround session, I can schedule that, and then boom. To upload a video, I can just drag and drop it. Same with data. Or if you have a YouTube link, you just paste a YouTube link. And once you've done that, I'm not going to do it right now. You enter a couple notes to your coach, and boom, that's it. So it's super, super easy. Everything lives here, communication, videos, all of that. So you can watch and rewatch them anytime.
Perfect. And so the coaching happens live, but it's being recorded, and then it stays here on your dashboard for you to go back and review if you wish, right?
Yeah. So the customer just uploads the video data. As a coach, I'm going to go deep dive, watch your video, watch your data, or look at your data, figure out what I want to talk about. I'm going to record the coaching session to you, going through your video, and I send it back to you.
Gotcha. So you're not actually communicating live, but the coach does it, and then you as a racer have whatever time is available to you. You click on it and you see what you need to see.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can always go back and watch them again and again and again.
Obviously, yeah.
Exactly. So it makes it super easy.
Perfect.
Yeah,
so
nice and easy.
Yeah. Let me reshare mine.
Go for it.
And where did that go? There it is. Let me reshare my screen. There's one. If we step back for just a moment, you've kind of already touched on it, but maybe you can give the highlights again. We call it virtual coaching, right? But virtual just because we're using the capabilities of the internet and capable of technology we have these days. And then the coaching side. What do you see? What as a company and looking back towards the end user? What is virtual coaching? How do you see it? You do car racing, motorcycles, karting. You talked about that you're actually getting into other forms of sports and setting up coaches. It sounded like. What is virtual coaching in that that one paragraph?
Yeah, so I guess let me take a step back and say, well, why is it virtual? What are the goals behind that? And really the goals are being able to access, to learn personally from the very best coaches in the world. So we all have our local guru or local club coach in all these sports. I can tell you from an experience of someone that's been coaching for 15 years that knows this deeply, most of the time in multiple sports, what they're quote unquote coaching is oftentimes the exact opposite of what I would want to see from a professional coach's perspective. So the goal of virtual coaching was being able to provide access to anyone in the world to learn personally from professional coaches and be able to learn personally from them, so that way you have access to the people that allowed me to learn and get me on my path. And that's really the passion behind it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a skill to this that while somebody may be very fast, they may know that track extremely well, but getting that information out to somebody else so they can learn it.
It's a different thing, right?
Is a different skill, number one, and probably just as important is there is that what works for that person may not be what is the best way to attack those particular types of corners or whatever it happens to be. They may not even be coaching the right thing. It just happens to be what what works for them. So
yeah,
so
exactly.
having competent, skilled coaches. I brought up a slide that is just some of the coaches that you use. Maybe you can explain some of these fellas and chat about it a little bit.
So, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of these names are pretty well known, at least in more in the U.S., with Ricky Taylor being just left Team Penske, going back to his dad's team, driver for Acura. I think a lot of us know Mike Skeen. Obviously, Jordan Taylor is a pretty big name and a fun name as well. So, what we do is we highly curate our coaches. So we don't just go to any professional driver and say, hey, come coach. We have them all do practice coaching sessions. I check on that personally to ensure the communication style is right. And what you find is, this allows people to pick their coach. So you can see a practice coach or see how they coach and find who's right for you. So for instance, my coaching style is heavily different than Mike Skeen's and then very different than Ricky Taylor's. So people might think I am not a very good coach or they might love me. And that doesn't bother me at all. It's what's right for the customer. So they can go and experience different coaches. And then what a lot of customers do is also get feedback from multiple coaches. So they might send their same video to me and then to Ricky Taylor. And the way that Ricky communicates and what he focuses on, there might be a generalized theme of techniques, but he might talk about car balance and manipulating car balance, where I might focus a little bit more on fundamentals of how we are manipulating our driving to get the most out of the car. So there might be different perspectives that we can learn as well. And we make it really easy to do that.
And Jeff has a good question that kind of ties into what you just mentioned there. His question is, when assigning a coach, do you try to prefer a coach that knows or has driven that particular track, or is it more the style of the learning style, or is it a combination of all of that?
That's a great question. And ultimately, it is a combination of everything. I can tell you from a perspective, what we really focus on technique. So we'll point out, hey, if you're turning a little bit late, or if you're turning a little early, or apex early, we'll point that stuff up. But that's not really coaching to me. Coaching's really, hey, here's the fundamental technique change that we need. Here's why, and here's how we're going to do that. So a lot of the needing to know the track is less important. So, I've coached many drivers on tracks I've never seen before, but we don't just pick it up and go. We go and study from a coaching perspective. And, we've all watched thousands and thousands of hours of racing. We've been to 60, 70 racetracks. We know pretty much the fundamentals. So the knowledge of the track, I don't want to underplay it, but it's not as important as you would think. It's more the communication style because it's more technique focused.
Yeah, that one corner, let's say mid-Ohio, where you have a dropping, a tightening radius and the camber goes away. That's the rarity, right? That is not what you should be. The bigger picture is attacking all the corners correctly. That is the last thing you might want to study, is that one corner technique, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Okay. Perfect. How long have you been providing this type of a service beyond you doing it as an individual? How long has Racers 360 been around?
We started playing around with this concept. I know Matt was actually one of our very first customers. And I want to say it was like middle to end of 2018. We were just testing this concept out. Does it work? Does it make sense? And back then we were like, just Dropbox me your video. I'll Dropbox you back a coaching session just to test it out. And then we built the dashboard and really started going, like, really trying to launch it in early 2019.
Okay, perfect. It's been growing fairly well. A lot of people are chatting about it. David asked the question, what single driving skill do you think is important in your career? Again, now we're getting away from maybe the bigger picture stuff, but what skill do you think that you have worked on or you have perfected to help you in your driving?
I think from the skills that the professionals are focused on is often a lot different than what I'm coaching on, just because of where the low-hanging fruit is. But really, when you look at professional racing, the vast majority of difference in lap time is really at the end of the brake zone through the apex. So really that turning point to apex and figuring out how do we roll a little bit more speed without rolling too much speed to not be too late to throttle. That's really where the majority of lap time is, whether I'm losing it or I'm gaining it. It's almost always there. I mean, everyone can break deep. Almost everyone can get a good exit. That's really going to be the large majority of lap time between professional drivers.
And it's something that I have noted. I'm not a racer, certainly not a road racer. I've raced other things, but I've looked at a lot of data, and the where that time compare bar at the bottom of the AIM software makes the biggest changes, either gain or loss of time, is at the lower speed sections, and which ties almost immediately to the end of the braking and the beginning of the throttle on, right?
Yeah.
That is where you, number one, it's the place to be smooth. It's the place where you save the tires. It's all of those things, but it's also where you gain the most time because it's the slowest part of the track, right?
Yeah. And I just saw that question there. Is that concept the same for bikes? And I've spent a lot of time with our lead coach, who's Ken Hill. He's actually the coach of two-time Moto America champion JD Beach. So I'm really fascinated to learn from Ken. And Ken also coaches a lot on car stuff. So we talk about the differences between bikes and cars and things like that. And that concept is actually the same in bikes. Yes, I am not a motorcycle rider, so I wouldn't be able to tell you that if I didn't know Ken pretty well. But what I've seen is it doesn't matter if you're in autocross, if you're in motorcycles, if you're even an oval race. I know there's less braking going on there, but from everything I've seen on the professional side, it's really that back end of the brake zone to turning point to apex that separates riders, drivers, and all of that.
Perfect. And David has a question I don't want you to answer now, but I think we'll transition into the data we're going to look at. Having said that the end of braking, that's an important piece, how do you coach that? Let's save that for the video when we look at something, but keep that in mind. What about open wheel versus closed wheel? I think you're going to have the same answer you just had about motorcycles, right? Exactly. There is a way to drive the track, right? And while there may be some fundamental tiny, little differences of aero versus what the driver is doing with the car probably is similar, at least at that upper level, right?
And I actually want to talk about that. So one of the most common questions we get is like, I race X and X or X type of car, whether it's, let's say it's a Porsche Cup car, Miata, a front wheel drive car. To be honest, from a technique perspective, the overall goal of how you drive a race car fast doesn't change. Now, there are subtleties within that, like a front wheel drive car. You might need to have your hands slightly more open. Maybe you're slightly later to initial throttle. And I'm talking like a half car length. It's like there's subtleties around that's how you adapt to a car, but how a Formula One driver even manipulates the car to how a Spec Miata driver is driving. That if you, again, big picture, the goal and how we drive the race car is the same. Yes, there are subtleties of differences, but I think we overplay, the specificities of different types of cars.
Physics don't change, right?
Yeah, exactly. As race car drivers, we manipulate physics to get the most out of the car, right?
You're manipulating the platform, right? You're moving stuff around.
Exactly.
Kind of a funny an aside before we jump over to look at some actual video and data here in a moment. My son came up through, did a similar route as you did, learned in karting, did a little bit of circle track stuff with Bandoleros just because of his age, and then got Spec Miata, and then some other stuff, but then went into off-road trucks, off-road racing. And what was interesting is as we were chatting along as he would go, he said he learned, just from the feeling that off-road race truck felt exactly like a Spec Miata at the limit, right? He was doing the same things to make it do what it needed to do, right? Super slow corners, maybe it's a little bit different because you got to rotate early or whatever, but you're still trying to the same process. And he said when he would actually get in there, he could easily forget that it was an off-road race truck because you're manipulating and you're doing the same things. You're trying to load that left front tire, or you're trying to to work the weight back, or whatever it happens to be. Interesting that there was such a similarity in a vastly different form of motorsports because physics doesn't change.
I didn't even know about that with off-road racing. I want to get into that though. It looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. The so let's let's take one more question as we kind of set up and get you towards, bringing up a video here real quickly. How do you coach trail braking? That is a topic. And do you coach it, number one? And how important is it? You'll talk to some coaches or some drivers who that I chat with, and boy, if you don't trail brake, you're nothing, right? Or boy, you should never trail brake. There's this vast difference in ways of doing that. What's your thought on that?
So I mean, I could talk for 2 hours on trail braking.
On trail braking.
Yeah. So okay, some of my beliefs, right? And I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. This is just my thoughts on the subject. One thing I do not like is to teach incorrect technique to beginners. So yes, I'm not going to go and tell a beginner to trail brake from day one, but I don't like that some organizations and some have the belief of you only brake in a straight line because trail braking is dangerous. I think that's wrong. I think that's the wrong approach because it actually opens up to more danger based off of initial throttle application, stuff like that. So the way that I teach trail braking is really a three-part, I don't even know what the word, three-part process. And initially, if you ask me what is the number one thing drivers should focus on to start off with, and the number one mistake we see at Racers 360, it all revolves around where do we drivers pick up the initial throttle. So for me to teach braking, you first teach on where do you touch the throttle. I don't want to touch it until I'm ready to unwind the steering wheel. So I don't talk about trail braking, how deep you want to brake. I am saying, hey, let's only apply the throttle here and don't try to brake deep. Coast. The whole belief that you always have to be on brakes and throttle, complete, utter, throw it out the window. We coast all the time. Allow yourself to coast. So first off, be really disciplined. I'm only applying the throttle as I am ready to unwind the steering wheel. One of the things of why coaching has to be personalized, there's always exceptions to the rules. So you're probably thinking like turn two at Willow Springs, turn 2 at Thunder Hill, Road America, the carousel. You can't do that. Those are exceptions. Vast majority of the corners, that's it. Step 2 is focusing on we pick up the throttle because we've overslowed. So that kind of solves that. Naturally, you'll start to be able to focus on how do I roll in more speed. That's where trail braking starts to come into the mix. So for me, I don't try to be like, you got to trail brake down to the apex. I start to say, hey, now you know where you want to get up the throttle. Slowly bring up more and more speed, and slowly play around with carrying the brakes into the corner. But be specific on corners that you try to do this on. Don't try to start out at turn 9 at Laguna Seca doing this, right? Start out at turn 11. So because you're going to make a mistake. Yes, trail braking puts more weight on the front. You're going to potentially lose the rear. So let's be smart on where we try it. But you have to, if you want to be a fast race car driver, you have to know how to trail brake. And again, you have to be able to adapt. So for instance, in my experience, a lot of my experiences is Audi GT3 cars. You trail brake a lot. I went and drove the Lamborghini GT3 car. It's the same chassis. It's pretty the same engine, same drivetrain. Everything's the same. And the first time I went and drove it at turn 7 at Sebring, I could not get the car to turn down to the apex. I was trail braking harder and harder and harder, and the front was understeering more and more and more until I stopped trail braking. I came off the brakes right at turning, and sure enough, this thing rotated, turned into the corner great. I have no clue why that makes sense. Somehow it was overloading the front tires. But you have to be able to adapt. But to be able to adapt, you have to know your fundamentals. And trail braking is a fundamental that you just have to do.
Yeah, you were trying to carry the car and not let the car carry you, right? You were trying to force the issue and not let the car's talking to you, and you okay, what does it want? I think I need to do this, and then the car told you even more. No, that's not what you're. That's not what you want.
And that's coaching is being able to explain the why and the how. So, and my goal as a coach and our goal as a platform is to give you this information. So, if you send your video from Mid-Ohio, great. Yeah, we want you to be faster in Mid-Ohio, but it's done in a way that you eventually be able to start to think and understand, how am I manipulating? Why am I doing this? So when you go to Summit Point or you go to Sebring, you start to pick up and be like, oh, wait, I think I should be doing this, and be able to kind of self-learn more.
Yeah, so it's a great point that while yes, you're giving some this great coaching from these magnificent coaches, but in the end, the person that's getting the coaching should be learning those skills, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you want them to continue to come back occasionally and do some different things, but we really want them to be able to do a lot of this on their own as well.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
You said a couple of things I'd just like to touch on before we open up the video, and we'll bring in Brick here in just a moment. But we talk about three things that we talk about a lot here. What happened, where did it happen, why did it happen? And you kind of mentioned a little bit of that, but that's the way we teach how to look at data, which, what happened, you were slower in turn two at the, whatever it happens to be, where did it happen exactly? Not just, that part of the corner, but that corner, but was it on, did the slowness, was it created, at the early part, the middle, the exit, whatever it happens to be, and then why. And that why, if we can't figure out the why, the rest of it is kind of academic, right? We have to get to that why at the end. So that is a big part of it. And the other thing we've talked about in probably 7, 8, 10 different videos we've done here is that word coasting. That is such a misunderstood thing. We do not want drivers to coast when they get off the throttle bend before they hit the brake too much, right? That's all fine, but it's a learning thing. But a lot of people think coasting really is you're down there at the apex of the corner, and if you're not on one pedal or the other, you're doing it wrong. And there's that third dimension that we always got to keep in mind, that there is times when you've got that lateral G-force. I consider that to be a piece of the coasting language. And if you are at maximum G's and if you get on either pedal, you're going to lose some of that, then you're not coasting as far as I'm concerned, right? From what you said and how you said it, we coast all the time. Well, of course you do, but you're at maximum lateral G's and you're waiting for the car to take that set or whatever it happens to be, so you can go ahead and get to one of the pedals.
I will caveat though. So yes, on the pro side, absolutely. But from how people learn, even if you're coasting, and when I say coasting, I don't mean off the throttle onto the brakes. That's not where I'm talking about, from the turning point to the apex. Even if you're getting out, this is your second track day, this is your first track day, you're not close to the limit. Even if you've been racing for 10 years and you turn in, you're not at lateral G, I would rather see the person be off the pedal completely, coasting, waiting to the apex before getting the throttle. It's all about reducing the amount of variables that we're trying to manipulate as drivers. So I am trying to be very focused on, I don't care about anything else right now other than where you pick up the initial throttle. Once we're really clear on that, okay, well, then we'll start to reduce the amount of coasting and start to figure that out. But it's about reducing variables, because as drivers, there's a lot of noise. And part of the thing is, from a coaching perspective, is helping people understand what noise is important. What do you focus on right now? How do we fix that? And then we as coaches know what's next, but we don't want you knowing what's next, because there's too many things in the mind at that point.
If it was easy, I'd be out there doing it. So of course, it's very, very hard to do correctly, right? And that's why we have coaches, and that's why it's there's such a draw to it from all of us that are watching this today, because it's you can learn, and then you just figure out that there's more to learn, and you can just continue to improve the craft, right?
Yeah, so exactly. And I would have a coach if I was still racing today. There's a weird adage in motorsports about coaching, and a lot of us pro drivers ask, like, why the hell is this, right? Like, why are we the sport that has less coaches? And it's dumb. Like, the best in the world, and no matter what you do, coach is going to help, because you need that outside perspective to keep you honest, right? So it's a really important part of, no matter what level you're on, it'll help. And even if I'm not even saying that because I own a company around it, right? It doesn't, outside of us, it's important.
Well, there is some level of self-coaching, which a lot of these guys that are watching this seminar, that's part of it. But at some point, you're going to want to have a little bit more help. You don't know what you don't know, and at some point you don't even know what to ask, right?
It's both, right?
And that's when it's perfect.
You need self-introspection to be able to learn, but to have the outside perspective combined with that, that's what really creates progress.
Occasionally, certainly, if not a lot, it's good that what you really do, my opinion now, right? But what you're really doing when you hire a coach and you pay them for their time, is that coach has invested a lot into that time and that knowledge, and they're sharing some of that knowledge with you, which cuts down on your time to learn, the time that it takes to learn in such a great way that it may take 2 years to learn some of the stuff that you'll get out of a 1-hour session.
Yeah. And I will say, the one thing that I've seen a lot of, and like, for instance, I'm an amateur tennis player. I am a terrible tennis player, but I love to play tennis, right? So the one thing I always bring it back to is, like, I go and watch YouTube videos on how to be a better server, right? And if you look at a serve, right, there's the ball toss, there's the eyes, there's the elbow, there's the wrist, there's pronation. I might think I am doing the pronation wrong. more than likely I am doing something completely else wrong, and I'm actually okay with pronation. And I can tell you from the Racers 360, we always ask customers like, hey, what do you want to focus on? What do we want to work on? And 95% of the time, conservatively, what the driver, rider, carter thinks they should be working on is the exact opposite. Like most of the time they think they're struggling in this area. They're actually doing that pretty damn well. They're struggling over here, which is a precursor to this, right? And we're just inherently, like, humans are bad at really being able to read what we're doing and look at a generalized video and know which one of these techniques we need to improve on. That's a really hard thing, and most people are not great at it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to be good at that, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna bring up the video, and your typical process. I look at your website. I see some of the ways that you talk about the service, and video seems to be kind of the number one way of that you do this, right? And then we you also bring in data, pretty popular, and maybe a combination of both. But we're going to start with video, and then we're probably going to look at some data just really quickly, just to put it together. And then the third thing we'll probably do, just because we've got the software coming out, it's in beta right now. Then we'll look at the same data video in Race Studio 3 and take a look at it being, combined on the screen at the exact same time, and maybe we'll take a look at it that way. So
yeah,
let's
just a caveat, we chose video as our main tool. It's a great visual learning tool, but ultimately the goal of the platform was no matter what device you use for video, for data, you can send that in. So if you're using a phone and whatever device, that works. If you have a GoPro, that works. If you have a Smarty Cam, makes my life easy as a coach. I love the Smarty Cam, right? You send that in. For data, if you have a Solo 2, if you just have GPS, if you have better sensors, all of that doesn't matter. You can send it in, and there's coaching value behind it.
We'll talk about what sensors you like to see here in just a moment when we look at the data itself. Hey, Brick, turn on your camera and come join us for a moment. Brick is a technician and there he popped in. Thank you very much, Brick.
Hey, Brick.
Hey.
Brick is a technician in our Roanoke, Virginia office, one of our best, and he had some data that we've used a couple of other times before, and I think we thought about it, and I had some offers to bring in some data and video from accomplished racers and people with tons of experience, and I think back about some of the polling we've done on our typical customer here watching these webinars and who watches them on YouTube, and it was more of a track day guy, right? They've got a Solo, they've got a Smarty Cam, and it's kind of fun to put Brick on the spot, but but really Brick is more of what our typical customer is, and so I would love to show what you do with normal people like Brick that are out there and they're just learning the craft and they're having some fun, and they're not expecting that they're going to be called by Roger Penske tomorrow, but they're hoping to get better, and so this might be a kind of a fun thing. So
let's do it. I'm excited. Hope you are too, Brick.
Yeah, nice. I am. And man, if I had known in my infancy of being a technician at AIM by putting that Solo 2 DL and that Smarty Cam on my car, that it was going to be used over and over again in front of hundreds of people in this webinar, I probably would have done exactly the same thing.
And probably done the same. And we're not done yet, Brick. We're not done yet.
That's right.
So you better hope the weather changes there pretty quick so you can get us some new fresh data at some point soon, right?
I'm ready.
So this is a four-wheel drive, an all-wheel drive Subaru Wrx, and it's just I didn't even pick if this might be the best lap, if not. But again, we're just really talking about
doesn't matter.
The basics. We're not going through an entire process here. When you get the video, Dion, how do you typically do this when you're recording your response? Do you watch an entire lap? Do you just go right down to the important corners and start to work on it? How do you normally approach this?
Yeah, it kind of depends a little bit on what service. So like our base one lap analysis is just send us a one lap. It doesn't need to be your best lap, like a typical average lap. Like typically if on your best lap you did something different that you don't normally do, right? So a lot of times I just want to see an average lap, and I'll watch the whole lap. And then I'll understand, hey, what are the 2 or 3 main points that I want to coach you on? So it's not too much information. And I go through the lap, slow motion video, pause it. I've got a webcam and I talk through it. Or, you could send in data from an entire session. I'll pick out a couple laps, kind of go through it. And then the ultimate is really our race analysis, where I'll watch your entire race. We'll go talk about racecraft, speed things, mental stuff, race start. We watch the whole thing at that point.
Yeah, perfect. And I noticed the flag here, and that means that you're going to headwind going up the The S's, right? And then you got your tailwind coming, so your speed's going to be really
Totally.
fast coming down the back straight,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, help me with my excuses, please.
I'm working with you, Brick. I'm working with you.
Hey, that's part of the driver coaching is making sure you know how to talk like a driver, and part of that is
Part of
giving
the
the right
game.
excuses.
The other thing is we do have Smarty
Yes.
Cam video. Obviously, there is no brake pressure, but we do have throttle. And
Yep.
and Dion, you were talking about the important things to you. Obviously, speed, but you don't even need that. But that, as far as having some data on here, obviously speed. And when you've talked about it for the last 15 minutes, that you continue to. We take you somewhere else and you keep coming back to that transition point of off the brakes and onto the throttle. We're going to have a little bit of that to make your coaching even easier, because you're actually going to see it, not have to just hear it or feel it. So
Yeah, love it.
So I'm just gonna start the video, and we're near the start line. We're coming up to the start line at VIR here. So and hopefully the sound is not too bad and a little chunky when you first see it here, especially on
I think you've got it on slow motion too.
I do. So I remember I did that as we were.
Please don't make me any slower, Roger.
Yeah. You want me to pump it up to?
So there's that thing on your right foot. We just want to be a little bit more aggressive with that, right?
Right.
Jeez, it was right. There it is. Playback. I want it to be the default. Hopefully that will help it.
Let's see here.
I also would like to close this, but I don't sure if I know how. So let's see if I can get it. That didn't work. Let's try that again.
Does not want to do it. Oh, there it goes.
There it goes.
Cool. I think.
Let's try that.
Okay.
That still feels slow, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
Then I screwed
Yeah,
up.
just keep clicking that faster button.
Yeah. It's 1.
There we go.
It's not right yet, though.
The nice thing is it doesn't need to be perfect from a coaching perspective.
There you go. There's some of that. You're watching, I hope, as I tinker
A
here.
little bit, yeah. I was a little distracted there,
Yeah,
but
of course you were.
but we got some good stuff to talk about already.
Okay.
What I look at.
Let's stop that. So you've watched a little bit of one lap.
Yeah.
Let's go back to. Do you typically go back to a certain set of corners, or how do you?
We
normally do
typically
it?
start from the start of the lap, one lap analysis to kind of go right through it, right? So looking at for instance, actually, if you just pause it right about, we can just kind of go a little bit farther forward, a little bit more, like right here, for instance. Perfect. So one of the things that I will point out here is, judging from this video, I can immediately tell that our eyes are slightly low at corner exit, and I can really point this out. Now, turn 1 of VIR is its own little animal, right? But we have a lot of track to our left-hand side, and VIR turn 1, like, we're not using every inch of it, but we want to use quite a lot. And as a driver, our main focus is, how do I get back to full throttle as early as possible after the apex point? So I can immediately tell from a car placement perspective, we can see you're only about 30% throttle. So you're not comfortable committing back to full throttle because you have so much steering input still in the car, right? And are you familiar with the whole string tied from your hands to your feet thing, where you need to unwind the wheel as you get the throttle? Have you heard that before, Brick?
I don't think I have. I mean, I understand that as somewhat of a concept, but yeah, please
Gotcha.
Go ahead.
So one of the fundamentals that I love as a visualization is, if you have your hands straight, and imagine there's a string tied from your hands to your feet, and it's when one is at full input. So let's say you're at full throttle, the string is tight and you cannot move your hands. So as you start to move your hands, you have to release off the throttle, or vice versa. If you start to apply the throttle, it pulls your hands straight. So here, you're not able to commit back to full throttle because we're not unwinding the steering wheel enough. We're not using as much track, right? So this is where it turns into a great visual cue here, where you can really start to understand, I need to be able to unwind the steering wheel. I need to be able to use more track so that I can commit back to full throttle. And we use a lot of maintenance throttle overall, like through that turn 5A section, for instance, right? I would rather see you spend less time on throttle, but more time on full throttle. Does that make sense? That little kind of caveat, right? So That way you're not applying the throttle too early. I'm not carried about like one of the big fundamentals that we see a lot of is maintenance throttle. I try to avoid that as much as possible. In fact, one of the biggest differences between you and I is you're going to probably actually spend more time on throttle around VIR than I will. But I'm going to spend a lot more time at full throttle. So that's really as an emphasis. So that's just like one quick thing that I picked up on right away on the video. If we back this up just a little bit here, can we watch the brake zone of turn one, just kind of full speed one more time? I kind of missed that.
Full speed as far as what we see here.
Yeah, that's perfect. And can you click on, there we go. So I'm looking at the G circle here. And so if we pause it a little bit, one thing that I'm looking at there.
You want to pause back a
So,
little further?
and I can use like a simple GoPro oftentimes to be able to see this. No, it's cool. I can talk about this. So one of the things that you'll see here is your peak G was about 0.6 or so. And you'll see right before you turned in, we actually got to our peak G longitudinally right at the turning point. So I like to visualize, how I like to learn is sometimes visualize what my braking trace should look like, right? So right now, judging off your video, I think your brake trace looks something like where we get up to a G and we probably start to increase it and then we drop off of it pretty quick. So like if this is brake, right, like the higher up, the more aggressively you're braking.
Mm-hmm.
What I really want you to focus on, and what I'd love to see is, I don't care how deep you brake, I don't care how deep into the corner you trail brake, is just to progress up to your highest peak G of braking, your highest brake pressure earlier, and then really start to focus on releasing. So you might come off the brakes at the same point, you might have the same minimum speed. I don't care about any of that for right now. The reason why is it all comes down to weight transfer, right? When I'm making some assumptions here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think sometimes you probably have a little bit of a nervous rear as you start to enter the corner. And a lot of that is coming because you have your highest amount of G or brake pressure right before you turn in. That means you're transferring more weight to the front end, and that's going to make the rear more unstable. So if you want to bring in more entry speed, that means you're going to have even a higher brake pressure at the turning point, and that's where we start to really kind of get a happy rear end that we don't want. So if I were to work with you from a coaching perspective, the two main fundamentals, and I would need to watch more lap, would be A, car positioning, eyes on exit, really focus on unwinding the steering wheel. B, getting that peak brake pressure, progressing the peak brake pressure earlier in the brake zone. Those would be the two major things I would say, let's focus on today, and then send your next video on, and let's continue to work after that. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Good stuff.
Perfect. This is something I noticed a lot, and what we're going to do is we're going to transition over to data really quickly, and we don't have time to go through the entire lap. Obviously, that's not what this is really about. But now we'll transition into the data, and we'll take a look at turn one at VIR. And so let me open this up, pop that up to there, and this does happen to be his best lap that we're looking at. And what cool for just a quick discussion for everybody watching, what we've got, of course, it's VIR. Here is the turn one braking we were just talking about. We've got speed as the top line, lateral G's is the blue trace. We've got our longitudinal G, which what Dion was talking a lot about a minute ago, and then down below in the fourth one we've got throttle position. This particular car does not have brake pressure, so he's going to be looking at the braking a lot from the red longitudinal G line. So
yeah, exactly.
You go ahead and start with your pointer again and talk about what you just talked about here at turn one.
Yeah, so if you look at a lot of these brake zones here, I'm kind of highlighting just really quick as I go through them.
The harder you're on the brakes, the deeper the longitudinal G drops negative.
Exactly.
Okay.
And notice how a lot of times that comes very close to where that brake release point is where your peak longitudinal, your peak brake pressure comes. So really, I want to invert that. So a lot of times people talk about how you need to attack the pedal really hard and like your first hit should be the hardest. Not very true for a street car. You'll shock the brakes a little bit, shock the system. But think about think about like squeezing a sponge really tightly. So I want you working the full heavy brake pressure earlier in the brake zone. And then as you're going throughout the brake zone, you should be working on releasing off of it. The next part here is we talked about, like, I want to spend more time at full throttle, less time at maintenance throttle. We can spend a lot of time not close to full throttle, right? So, and it looks really messy. So the next point is, I want to see from a driving perspective that no throttle until you're ready to unwind the steering wheel. And I want to see nice, smooth throttle curves. So there's sort of the throttle and brakes are sort of an inverse. So what I'm telling you is when you attack the brakes and you get up to peak brake pressure, I want to see a nice consistent arc off of it. So once you start releasing off the brakes, you should never have to add brake pressure back into it. Now the throttle's the opposite of that. Once you start to feed in the throttle, you should never have to take the throttle back out, right? We never want to see a drop and then back to it. So that means you have to be applying the throttle closer to the apex point so you're not understeering wide on exit. So like my goal would be, yeah, it's tough to get back to full throttle out of turn 1 of VAR. It's a really difficult corner, but can we delay that? Can we fix this so that we can get a little bit of full throttle before the brake zone in turn 3? I'd want to see you back to full throttle out of turn 3, but maybe delaying that initial throttle application, waiting for your hands to be straighter, going to it, spending more time at full throttle, not trying to just spend more time at throttle. Have a goal behind what we're doing. And that kind of just highlights what I would look for on data to help visualize that. And like immediately I can see, hey, what's going on here, right? Like this looks really, really messy. So then I would go and look at the video and try to understand what's the car positioning. Why is it messy? Like I can't just use the data alone to understand what's going on here. This is where I'd want to see the video to understand car positioning, to give me another layer of coaching.
Perfect. And again, we're not digging in deep in this particular one, but everybody sees the process, right? And frankly, Brick has talked about this data, and we looked at it deeper in the past. And he had a braking issue. Ironically, you picked up on it pretty quickly. The car had a problem, and he has since fixed it. But and he hasn't been back to the track since yet. But we can see that you talked about it, quite a bit, where he hits the brakes, he goes along, and then he's attacking him a little bit more just before. I mean, if I put the cursor here, it's in the last third of the braking, and he is still there just as he's approaching, getting ready to jump off it. One good thing though is that I look at this, and while yes, he's not getting to full throttle, there is very few spots here. These are shifts that we're seeing, some of these dips, but generally speaking, as he is applying throttle, he's never having to back off it, which means he's not overdriving that totally middle of the corner. He's doing everything correctly. It just needs to get it to the point where he can get to more towards full throttle instead of partial throttle as he's rolling through. So
absolutely
good for him. So then the third piece of that, you talked about it. We looked at data. You even mentioned it. It says you'd need to probably jump back to the video to understand what happened, where it happened, why did it happen. Our three corners of our data analysis triangles, we call it. So then let's bring up Race Studio 3 of the. Oops, and I got an extra lap on there real quickly. So it looks basically the same. I've tried to even use the same colors, the same layout for you, and then we've got our video here. So I'm just going to jump back, and we won't have sound, or I've got it turned down, I think.
Yeah, no worries on that.
Yeah, so we're coming down here, and you can see where he's applied the brakes to the full area. I'm going to make this just a little bit smaller on the data side so we can see maybe the video even clearer. A couple things as we're in the braking zone. We got about another 4 or 5 minutes. Let's maybe talk this braking at the end of the straightaway and down through turn 1. Really, walk our way through this really quickly. What about using all of the track here? Now that you've got the video, now we can kind of see a little bit of that braking. What do you see there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say that's a kind of a subtlety point, right? Where I would, a lot of drivers know, like, I would rather see you be a little bit closer, more parallel with the 6 board as you get out there, right? So that you can brake with your hands straighter. I know with that kink, oftentimes, depending on the car, maybe I'm not even perfectly out there by the 6 board. So it kind of, it's not a huge focus of mine, but an easy point just to visually keep your eyes up is just to look for that 6-board. Okay, let me unwind the steering wheel, let the car be free out to there. So I'm braking with my hands straight. We always want to, anytime we can brake with our hands straight, we want to brake with our hands straight.
Perfect. And here now is where he starts to apply more braking. See by the longitudinal G.
Yep.
So now he's moved his way out there, right? Exactly what you just said. Maybe a little later than what we might have wanted early on, but now he's there and he's starting to really apply the brakes.
Yeah, exactly. And so knowing there's a car issue, I would try to find out what's more behind it, right? Exactly. That definitely changes things. So let's just say for right now, let's just say, hey, there's no issue. This is just how we were driving it. Oftentimes what I can infer from additional brake pressure before or right at the turning point is typically low I's, because most of the time that means we feel like, oh no, we're going pretty fast. I need to slow the car down more. So the best terminology that I've liked when I've learned about vision, and I think everyone has their own opinion on this, is really thinking about it from a hunting perspective. Like, I want to hunt for the next spot. So right now I'm braking with my hands straight. There's not going to be, vision's not something where it's one spot to the next, right? It's a transitionary thing. We have peripheral and we have focus, a focal point of our vision. So right now, as you're approaching that turn-in marker, the way I like to explain it is, once my car trajectory or my vehicle trajectory is headed towards where I want it to go, that's when I transition my eyes to the next point. So roughly in this range right now, you know your trajectory is headed towards that turning point. And this is where I'd like your vision to start to hunt for that next visual cue, which is your apex point. You pick up that turning point with your periphery. So I would start to play the video a little bit farther forward and then start to talk about just a tiny bit more, like another 2 car lengths, right? A little bit more, right about here. So now the same point, right? Your car trajectory is headed towards the apex point. And we talked about how we're not using enough track on corner exit. I think a lot of that could be down to our vision being too low. This is where I'd kind of point, our car trajectory is headed towards the apex. You know it's headed for the right spot now. So this is the point where I'm starting to pick my vision up and I'm starting to hunt for that next point. And actually, for beginner drivers, the most important visual cue is your corner exit. I like to coach corners backwards. So we first focus on exit, car placement on exit, then we figure out the apex, then we figure out the rest of the corner. Because ultimately, the beginning of the corner doesn't matter if you don't know where the car should be placed on corner exit, right? And out of turn 1, it's a unique spot. We're not using quite all the track. We're using most of it. Out of turn 3, we're using all the track. Out of turn 4, we're holding it to the inside. So we work corner backwards, understanding what's the important thing we want to do in this corner, figure out where I want to place the car. Once I know where I want to place the car, that's going to tell me where I apex, right? Because if I exit in different places, that's going to change where I want to apex. So we start to work corner backwards. And a lot of people don't focus on the exit enough. So I teach exit as like an exit apex point, right? Like, I am looking, a lot of people look at just the exit curb, but then look for a finite spot for their apex. Your exit, visually, you should be focused for, like, where is that one spot I want to let the car be free and open up to and use every inch of the road? Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Perfect. And we can see that we're right here. He is coming off of the brakes. The longitudinal is coming up. He started his turn-in process already. The laterals have started to climb.
Yep.
And you can see here by the throttle is just starting to crack, right?
Which is just too early.
A little bit too early because he still has some more work to get done before he gets there.
And that throttle is something that's like super specific, right? Like, there's some things, like, to be honest with you, there's some apexes you can miss by like a car width, a half car width, and it's like, who cares? Like, some tracks less so, like turn 3 at Laguna Seca, you got to be on it. Turn 7 at Sebring, you actually can miss that by a little bit. It's not the end of the world. Throttle, though, like, where you pick it up, it is down to like the inch, like super specific on no throttle until you're unwinding the steering wheel. Super, super specific, because this little bit of throttle is taking just that enough weight off the front end. You're reducing understeering to the car. And now eventually you're going to start to say, I'm at the limit of the car. I can't roll any more entry speed in, but you can't because you're manipulating the car weight transfer incorrectly, right? So this is one thing where I am very annoying about being super specific. Like, no, within a car width isn't good enough. Like, it's got to be right at the point. Other things less so, but this is one that's like a fundamental that's really important.
And almost
Got it.
everything in data, you find that problem area, and it's all built by the last 100 or 200 feet, right?
Yeah.
So whenever you find a problem, don't try to solve that problem right there. It's because of something that's already been done. That's where you got to go look, right?
And that kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, the reason you're picking up the throttle right now is probably because you feel like you're going too slow. You're like, oh, damn, I overslowed the corner. Let me get the throttle. Well, we know it's a bad habit. So what we're going to do is say, and this is going to be a take one step back, take 5 steps forward type of thing, but we're going to say, nope, no throttle. I want you to crawl to the apex. It's almost like you're punishing yourself, because we're going to fix that overslowing problem correctly. Getting the throttle is not the correct way to solve it. We got to solve it in a different way. We're not going to talk about that today. We're going to just focus on this. And then once you're specific with that, then we can start to talk about how do we solve that correctly.
Perfect. And with the data and the video together, it makes this a little bit easier to see as well.
Totally. It makes my job easier, right? Like, we can do this just with a GoPro, but it's a little bit like you turn the volume on. It's harder to be quite as specific. Like, I can see the weight transfer in the car. This allows another layer, right? Like, the more sensors we have, I love keeping it simple, right? So I typically, even when I'm coaching and looking at myself, I only use brake percentage or pressure, throttle, speed, maybe steering. Every once in a while, maybe I'll click on gearing. I don't look at RPM. I keep it as simple as possible. I almost only just use those channels. And obviously you don't have brake pressure here. So G long, G lat, not quite as good, but obviously does the job. So try to make it as simple as possible.
Perfect. I think what I'd like to do now is maybe go to some of our questions and answers. Brick, I appreciate you coming on. I know it's never easy. It's never fun, but I think you got some great free information there, along with the rest of our folks as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of what was going on with the car, there's still things that as a driver I could work on, and Dion definitely pointed those out. So
it's true for all of us.
Always for every driver. that is of no question, right?
Yeah.
So, perfect. Thanks, Brick. I appreciate it. We're going to go through Dion. As we kind of close this down, we're at that point. But I'd like to hit you with some rapid fire, quick questions, and just kind of close us up here.
Let's hit it.
Yeah. A couple things about. You mentioned it a little bit. If you talked about brakes and throttle and G's and any of that. Andy talks about additional sensors. What is there anything else that you would really like to see? What about steering or brake pressure? Obviously, you did talk about that one a little bit. Brake bias, maybe. Is there anything that you have found that does help you if a customer has the opportunity to put sensors on the car?
Yeah, so I would say, let's say we have ultimate amount of sensors. From a coaching perspective, if I'm doing a deep dive session, what am I going to use? I'm going to use speed. I'm going to use brake pressure, throttle. I might look a little bit at steering. For sure, time delta. That's about it. I don't really need much else other than that.
Perfect. So if somebody is thinking about using your service, that's really what you're after, and you can get a lot of that from our solo DL, and of course the video, and making even better if you can put those particular channels up on the video. So then when you use the video, you can do a little bit of the data work right there with it. So
yeah, exactly. And to be honest with you, like, I can watch a GoPro video and almost draw the data for the most part. Like,
exactly. Because you a lot of experience, right?
Yeah, exactly.
David asked, I'm sorry, it was Marcus that asked a question that had me intrigued, and again, we're lightning around it a bit of how do you choose the coach, or can you coach me to decide who to choose, pun intended? Right?
Yeah, totally. We are actually building in, we're working with a top performance psychologist to build in the very first platform to help people match coaches with personality learning types. That's not quite released yet. So you have the option to select a coach, and it's a slight additional fee for that, or you can let us select a coach for you. They're all world-class coaches, highly curated. You can go and watch on all of their profiles, a sample coaching session, so you can see different communication styles and things like that.
Perfect. I think we've already hit on David's question a little bit, and it just went away about end-up brakings. We talked about that. Ray Hansen has a question that I thought was pretty intriguing, and I'd like to end with Ian's question down here. But how do you tell when you're approaching the limit as a driver, as the person being coached while we're out there driving? I know I'm going slower than needed because I don't want to trash my street car. But as the bigger picture, how do you know as a driver out on the track that you're approaching the limit? And you kind of mentioned a little bit where maybe we just keep keep moving that limit back so you can get on the throttle earlier, right? You might feel like you're at the limit, but you're at the limit at the wrong spot for speed. Maybe
Yeah,
is that a good way to put it?
That's a really good question. So the way that I coach approaching the limit, right, is first focused on fundamentals. So let's just get your basics done right. And then essentially we pick a safe corner to experiment with, right? Not every track has one of these, like turn 2 at Laguna Seca, right? Could be one at the top of my mind, or it's pretty open. And that's where we're going to have a process of knowing, here's my technique, here's what I'm focused on. Now, in the specific areas, it depends on the driver and the situation of the car or the vehicle. Maybe as I'm focusing on the brake release to roll in more entry speed. Well, now I'm going to brake at the same point. I know I'm getting the throttle there. I'm just focused on the brake release. I'm going to release a little bit earlier, a little bit earlier, a little bit earlier in a systematic way until you go over the limit. You have to go over the limit. But when it's done in a way that's built off of fundamentals, it allows you to make smaller changes, smarter changes. So when you go over the limit, it's small and you know what the adjustment needs to be to bring it back a little bit. So everything here needs to be done around fundamentals, around having a plan. It's not going out there and just shooting at the hip trying to find the limit. That's where risk goes high. You can find the limit with low risk when it's built around fundamentals and a plan.
Perfect. And you need to know what those you need to know where you need to work, and that's the biggest thing. Yes, everything you just said is important, but boy, if you don't know what to work on, you're shooting without any bullets, right? You don't know where you're heading. So,
and that's where risk in our sport goes high, right? Is I hit a plateau, I'm frustrated, I need to go faster, I don't know how to go faster, I'm just going to go for it, I need more entry speed, or I need to get the throttle earlier. But now that's going to create throttle on oversteer at corner X because you can't unwind the steering wheel, and now you've got a big problem.
You mentioned that as one of your mistakes early on when you were driving the Lamborghini. You went in there and it's not doing what I want. Let me just try harder, right? And we gotta watch that. But you picked up on it real quickly, but that's not the right approach, right?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on brake pressure before or after the ABS system? I would almost like to turn that into a. We may have sensors that give us both of those, but what about ABS driving versus cars without ABS from your coaching standpoint? Do you coach people when you get to that point just to stand on the ABS and use it, or do you still teach some feedback?
I think it kind of depends on what the quality ABS is. So like, for instance, in the GT3 cars, right, we have a full-on Bosch system that's really, really good. Even then, I'm not just standing on it and using it, right? Like once the ABS kicks in, you've reached your peak. Like you're not slowing down any faster. So I know some professional drivers in GT3 cars love to lay into ABS. I'm not one of those. Yeah. Most people that are driving on a racetrack have pretty low quality ABS. So I like breaking up to the point just before it kicks in and playing around that. So I treat ABS like a lockup, right? I want to brake until I start to lock it up and then bring it back a little bit. That's where you're at the limit.
I'm pretty darn strong opinionated on that one, right? If you have it, great, but you should be driving the car at the maximizing everything you have. And I like to get up there and feel it and then come back and then drive it right at that limit. What happens if one of them goes out or you end up jumping into a spec Miata or something later in the day? It's nice to be always working that at the limit and not just getting up and be dependent on the system.
And to be honest with you, like outside of the GT3 car with the really, really fancy stuff, I hate ABS. It's not smooth. It jerks. I'm slowing down slower, not faster. So unless the ABS is really good, I avoid it.
Perfect. Do you coach car setup, which creates a driver is having to drive different? What about that car setup side? Are you coaching also? If you were looking at this, hey, the car looks like it's doing X, maybe tweak that a little bit. That will help you with your driving as well.
Yeah, so totally. We get a lot of questions like, man, I got a lot of understeer. Now, I will tell you, I use big numbers, but I'm not exaggerating. 90% of the time I see that, it's driver induced, not setup induced. And, my big thing is don't do setup until you get your driving fix, because you're going to start to typically adjust setup around issues that you're inducing as a driver. And if you get the car working then, and then you start to layer in driver improvements, now the car's not going to be very well set up for what we want it to do and how we want it to be. It's going to make improving your driving a lot harder. So I first focus again, fundamentals. Once those are okay, absolutely. We'll start to suggest things like, I've got the bumps in turn 17 are really affecting me. I look at all of this. Okay, we could talk about compression on the shocks. Maybe try a different spring package if you have the option to. So we have those conversations. We suggest things. But again, it's hyper focused on the driver because it has to be, even at our level.
The fundamentals are the fundamentals, right? If you're not doing those right, the rest of that doesn't. You can change the car until till the end of the weekend, and it's not going to matter if the driver's not doing the fundamentals correctly.
Yeah, but long story short, yes, absolutely, we can recommend stuff on setup if we think it's the right thing.
There you go, in the right order, right?
Exactly.
Perfect. Let's I've got one more question for you. You can read it for a second. I'd like to come back and it's kind of probably a personalized story. So we'll chat about that one in a second. Let me kind of do this ending stuff, and then when we close up, we'll chat about that. Your Volkswagen Rabbit Golf, whatever they were at APR, and
yes,
and getting beat up by the tech guys, I suppose. We'll talk about that in a moment. This video, like all the rest of them, within an hour or so will be up on YouTube. This will be number 142 that we've got up there. Not just our webinars, but tons of other information and technical how-to videos. So everybody go visit us there. All the stuff that's been in the chat, all the links we've talked about will be in the description box below. The data files for this will be, if you're watching this on YouTube later, will be down. Links to the data that we were just looking at in video will be down below in the description box. So take a look at that. The AIM, just like Racer 360, AIM is a customer support company. We're here to help, right? And so if you see us out at the track, please come up and say hi. And if you're not at a track, or you're at a track that we're not at, there's an 800 number there. You've got our email. Give us a holler. We're here to help. That's really what we do. The next webinar we're going to have a week from today, on Tuesday, the 26th. We're going to bring back a fellow that's been with us before, John Block from Autoware.com. is going to talk to us about better braking with data. A lot of what Dion just talked about was braking, and John has some pretty cool tips and tricks that he's going to talk about, some math channels and some ways of making, if you're doing your braking correctly, we can see it very, very quickly in the data with the math channels. And so he's just going to give us some ways to do what Dion just talked about and see it even quicker in the data before you even look at your video. So join us next week, a week from today, 10 o'clock on Tuesday, the 26th, and we'll have John Block here as our co-host for that one. That one will be fun. So looking forward to that. A little bit of contact information, and we'll get that last question answered here, but there's my contact information. If there's anything that you would like to ask me for what some of the stuff we've talked about today or in any of the previous webinars, there's my information. Dion, there's how to get a hold of Dion. Dion, we've got that one last question as we kind of close it out. Chris talks about your time at APR, and you had boost spikes and I think the background story in my mind there was some fights with tech and some other things because there was limits on things. How do you, as a driver, how do you drive around some of, maybe not even specifics, but false readings? Maybe you're getting some odd stuff. How do you're going to see something in the data? How are you driving?
So, with those whole boost spikes things, I'm going to be an ostrich with my head in the sand. I know nothing behind that, right? To be honest with you, it kind of just, I'm very repetitive, but you just kind of focus on what you got to do as a driver, right? Like, I don't care if the car is boost spiking. I don't even understand, from an engineering perspective, like why, what's happening. So if I'm a driver, ask my engineer, do I need to do anything different? Give me a really quick answer because I'm driving. Tell me what I need to do different. If I need to do anything different, I'm going to do that different, but then figure out how do I do that, but still have as much fundamentals as I can see. So like, for instance, we talked about the data and we saw how Brick was braking harder at the end due to that braking issue. I'd be trying to figure out as a driver, what can I do in my driving to adapt without going to bad habits? So do I need to brake earlier to get that peak brake pressure and release? How do I adapt? But I know my fundamentals. I know what I want to achieve. I can't always achieve it. I have to maybe manipulate certain stuff to do that, but I kind of have my focus of what it goes back to. So with boost spikes, things like that, I don't remember it changing much as a driver, but that's what's going through my mind.
More of a mental question, right? A little bit of inside baseball there, right? There was a little drama behind all of that, obviously, and you were a paid driver coming in and driving the car and getting the most out of it you could. The rest of that is dealt with by the team, right?
Yeah, exactly. You
but
lean
there
on
is
the
that
team to do
external
as much
pressure,
as
though.
possible. Yeah,
But there is
totally.
that external pressure that you're feeling, and you
look,
know, you do
I
what you do.
love talking about the mental side of stuff. I try to incorporate it into as much coaching as I can, but like I know that you guys have talked about it. I'm a huge believer in meditation, breathing. I know a lot of that sounds frou-frou, especially for the more engineering minds, but I can tell you I've been to top sports scientists in the business, people that work with Formula One drivers and things like that, actually out in Formula Medicine in Viareggio, Italy, and learned a lot about it and learned a lot about myself, my mind. And like, for instance, I have an overactive mind, which means I have a very high mental economy. I work hard to achieve a high level. So a lot of other drivers can maybe be more relaxed to be able to achieve that. So learning how to relax, how to quiet the mind will be a really important part for performance in any sport, but especially motorsports.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an odd combination of physical and mental here in motorsports, isn't it?
Totally.
And last week we had a great engineering the driver session where we brought in Dr. David Ferguson, who has worked in Formula One, NASCAR, IndyCar with some of the drivers that are coaches of yours. He's worked directly with, and we talked about some of that. So if anybody wants to learn more about information about that, look on our YouTube page. And engineering the driver just last week was a pretty cool webinar. So
it's worth it for sure.
Absolutely. Again, thank you very much, Dion. It has been very informational, very enlightening for me certainly, and I know a lot of others as well. Hopefully, maybe a month or two down the road, maybe we'll bring you back and we'll do a part 2, and we can dig into a little bit more in-depth stuff. But I certainly appreciate having you here and taking your time to do this. I know you're a busy guy, so
yeah. No, look, I really appreciate you having me on board. Absolutely, we're huge fans of AIM. Anything that makes data, video more accessible, we want to support. And thanks for everyone for joining in. And please reach out if you have questions, regardless if you want to use us or not. Whatever we can do to help support you, support the community, reach out. Racers360, I manage all of our social media, or you can email me, dion@racers360.com. Go to our website, racers360.com. Reach out to us. You'll probably hear from me back personally. Would love to answer any questions you've got on and whatever we can do to help you.
Perfect. Great session. I appreciate everybody. We went through a lot pretty quickly. You may want to go back and rewatch this one on YouTube because we covered quite a bit pretty quickly. So thanks everybody for coming. Look forward to seeing everybody next week when we're going to talk about brakes and data, and looking forward to that one as too. Thanks again, Dion, and thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.